Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, High Commissioner Bachelet, I declare open the meeting of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. The draft agenda was distributed to all members and observers, and if there is no objection, I declare the agenda adopted. Today, we have one item on our agenda, a briefing by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Michelle Bachelet. We are honored and thankful to Ms. Bachelet for being with us today and for giving us an opportunity to engage in interactive dialogue. I encourage the committee to make full use of this unique opportunity. The human rights of the Palestinians are being trampled upon daily, and the Office of the High Commissioner and the Special Procedure of the Human Rights Council have been very active in documenting the situation. At the same time, there is a shocking impunity for the crimes committed against the Palestinian people. Our committee has remained actively engaged, organizing regular activities to highlight the ongoing violations endured by the Palestinian people in their quest to fulfill their inalienable rights. In our annual reports, we have consistently called for the international community to stop the impunity committed by the occupying power. When the war on Gaza broke out in May, the committee raised its voice, strongly condemning attacks against civilians and calling for Security Council to act. In October, we voiced deep concern over the Israeli designation of reputable human rights NGOs as terrorist organizations. Immediately after this meeting, after this meeting is over, we will be meeting with human rights defenders to discuss ways to address the shrinking space for Palestinian civil society. Earlier this year, the committee held a virtual international conference on forced demographic change in Jerusalem. We also sponsored an event on assistance for Palestine refugees who are facing their own set of human rights challenges. In May, our forum with international parliamentarians focused on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334. And in March, during the CSW, we focused on women, peace, and security. Just last week, during the International Day of Solidarity, we heard forceful messages from prominent human rights defenders, including Ms. Malala Yousafzai, the Secretary General of Amnesty International, Ms. Agnes Kalamard, and other prominent personalities. Let me share the impassioned plea of Jerusalem activist Muhammad Al-Kurd. Impunity for war crimes will not be stopped by statements of solidarity. Only action will. I'm asking all of you to be brave. We deserve our land back. High Commissioner Bachelet needs no introduction. President of Chile for 2 terms. She also headed UN Women between 2010 and 2013. And since becoming High Commissioner, she has been an outspoken critic of human rights violation in Palestine. We look forward to a briefing about the situation on the ground and the current state of play with regard to initiatives such as database of settlement-related businesses and the newly established Standing Commission of Inquiry. I would be interested to learn about the human rights reviews Israel and Palestine have undergone in the treaty bodies. Following Ms. Bachelet's briefing, I will take some questions. I encourage delegates to keep their intervention brief and interactive. There will be no time for statements or remarks. This meeting is also being streamed live via the UN Web TV, the UN YouTube and Facebook channels, and it is further shared on the committee's website, UNISPAL, and its Facebook and Twitter pages. It is also being recorded and will be available for reviewing at your convenience. I would like to give a warm welcome to the audience following us via different platforms. I would like now to give the floor to Ms. Bachelet, speaking from Geneva. Madam High Commissioner, you have the floor.
you very much, distinguished chair, members of the committee, excellencies. I'm grateful for the opportunity to brief the committee about the acute concerns of my office regarding the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. I begin with the situation in Gaza. In May this year, we witnessed the most significant escalation in hostilities since 2014, resulting in the killing of 261 Palestinians, including 67 children. My office determined that 130 of those kills were civilians. This escalation was directly linked to protests and violent responses by Israeli security forces, first in East Jerusalem, then spreading to the entire occupied Palestinian territory and to Israel. A special session of the Human Rights Council was subsequently convened, in which I and other speakers raised serious concerns over the high level of civilian fatalities and injuries resulting from strikes in densely populated areas, as well as the widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure, noting that such attacks raise serious concerns of compliance with international humanitarian law. At that time, the Human Rights Council decided to establish an ongoing, independent, international commission of inquiry with a mandate to investigate, and I will quote, all alleged violations and abuses of international human rights law leading up and since 13 April 2021, end of quote. I was also mandated to investigate, and again I will quote, all underlying root causes of recurrent tensions, instability, and protraction of conflict, including systematic discrimination and repression based on national, ethnic, racial, or religious identity, end of quote. My office has been provided administrative support to the establishment of the Commission, which expected to present its first report at the Human Rights Council session in June 2022. In addition to recurrent cycles of hostilities, the people of Gaza also continue to suffer from a 15-year land, sea, and air blockade, leading to a continuous and deeply damaging deterioration of human rights and humanitarian conditions. Vital infrastructure is crumbling. The decaying sewer system constitutes a threat to health, as I noted in my report to the Human Rights Council September session on the allocation of water resources in the occupied Palestinian territory. Severe movement restriction and obstructions to people's access to essential goods and services, including specialized health care, generate immense suffering. I have repeatedly emphasized that Palestinians have the right to live safely and freely in their homes, with adequate access to essential services and opportunities, amid respect for their right to life and physical integrity. Instead, in the lived reality of the occupation and blockade, they are systematically deprived of the fundamental rights and freedoms due to every human being. Reconstruction and recovery efforts are ongoing in Gaza, and the fragile cessation of hostilities continues to hold. However, although some goods have been gradually allowed to enter Gaza through the Israel-controlled Karem Shalom crossing, as well as the Egypt-controlled Rafah crossing, humanitarian conditions remain deeply concerning. Further steps are needed by all parties to ensure a sustainable solution that ultimately leads to the return of legitimate Palestinian governmental institutions to the Gaza Strip. Let me turn to the issue of civic freedoms. Excellencies, on 19th of October, Israel designated 6 Palestinian civil society organizations as terrorist organizations under Israel's counterterrorism law of 2016. On the 7th of November, they were also declared unlawful in the occupied territory under the Emergency Defense Regulations of 1945. These designations appear to have been based on vague or unsubstantiated reasons, including claims related to legitimate and entirely peaceful human rights activities. All 6 organizations have worked with the international community, including the UN, for decades, collectively defending human rights and providing humanitarian assistance for thousands of people. My office has also received credible reports that the notorious Pegasus spyware was installed on the mobile phone of some staff of the 6 designated organizations. Claims of links to terrorism are extremely serious and should be treated as such by all. The basis for such allegations must be of the highest standard, based in probable evidence, and should be made in transparent manner. Without adequate substantive evidence, these decisions appear arbitrary and further erode the civic and humanitarian space in the occupied Palestinian territory. They can therefore legitimately be viewed as an attack on human rights defenders, on the rights to freedom of association, opinion and expression, and on the right to public participation. This pattern of pressures on civil society groups, notably those who work to document and defend Palestinian human rights, has existed for many years. Israel's continuous policy of restricting the space for legitimate activities of civil society is inconsistent with its obligations under international human rights law. It also threatens to limit further the space for peaceful dialogue. I also regret that actions by the Palestinian Authority have contributed to restricting the civic space for Palestinians. The right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are increasingly curtailed. Since June 2021, my office has documented cases of assaults on journalists and human rights defenders, as well as intimidation, gender-based violence and harassment, excessive use of force, arbitrary arrest, and censorship. In Gaza, the de facto authorities have also restricted Palestinians' right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, with particular targeting of journalists through raids, arrests, and harassment. Excellencies, my concerns continue to deepen about the numerous killings and injuries of Palestinians across the occupied Palestinian territory by Israeli forces, as well as increasingly by armed settlers. The use of excessive or entirely unwarranted force by Israeli forces appears in many instances to be a measure of first rather than last resort, as required under international law. I am particularly alarmed at recurrent incidents of excessive use of force leading to the death and injury of Palestinian children. On the 5th of November, a 15-year-old Palestinian boy was shot with live ammunition in the abdomen and killed by Israeli forces stationed about 50 meters away during demonstrations in Deir al-Habad near the illegal Israeli settlement Elon Moreh. This year, Israeli forces have killed 16 children in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. This and all other killings, as well as all incidents of excessive and unwarranted use of lethal force by Israeli forces, must be thoroughly and effectively investigated, and those responsible held to account. The chronic impunity in the occupied Palestinian territory for violations has been repeatedly raised in reports by Secretary General and myself. Settler-related violence is also at alarming high levels, amid continued tensions over settlement expansion and the annual olive harvest season. In the past year, there have been 490 incidents resulting in death, injury, and/or significant property damage, the highest incidence of settler violence even recorded by the United Nations. Currently, it represents an average of almost one incident of settler violence each day. The severity of the violence has also intensified, with 4 Palestinians killed and 167 injured by settlers, including 7 with live ammunition. In 3 additional cases, it was not possible to determine whether the victims were killed by ISF or by settlers. Despite reports that the Israeli authorities have taken steps, the justice system continues to fail to hold settlers accountable for violence against Palestinians. This lack of accountability for settler violence contributes to the increased number and severity of attacks. I note also that the approval, planning, and construction of Israeli settlements continued unabated across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. In the past year, settlers have established 12 new outposts in the West Bank. Most recently, on the 24th of October, Israeli authorities announced tenders for some 1,350 housing units in settlements. The announcement also included the reusage of tenders for some 80 units in the settlement of Givat Hamatos, and will further curtail access and links between East Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Excellencies, children continue to suffer disproportionate impact from the recurrent cycles of military's escalation and associated deprivation. Reports by our UN partners indicate that 70% of all children in Gaza are in need of mental health, and psychosocial support, as well as other community and family-based services. Currently, 160 Palestinian children are detained by Israel, some of them without charge, under administrative detention regulations, whereas international law provides that arrest, detention, or imprisonment of a child should be used only as a measure of last resort and for the shortest appropriate period of time, and that children must benefit from a child-friendly justice system that minimizes the challenges they face in each aspect of a legal proceeding. It should be clearly understood that under international law, administrative detention is permitted only in exceptional circumstances and must be subject to strict safeguards to prevent arbitrariness. This is not the case in the occupied Palestinian territory today. We also continue to receive disturbing reports of the ill treatment of children during their arrest, transfer, interrogation, and detention by Israeli authorities. Excellencies, overall, the human rights situation in the OPT at present can fairly be characterized as disastrous, with severe infringement of the inalienable rights of over 4 million people in numerous domains. This clearly also has damaging impact on prospects for peace and sustainable development for Israel as well as the surrounding region. The root causes of the violation I have described need to be addressed so that the continuing cycles of violence can be stopped. This requires the commitment of the international community to ensure long overdue accountability for all violation of human rights and humanitarian law in the occupied Palestinian territory by whoever committed. As we have repeatedly said, no matter how long the road has been, never ending cannot be an acceptable description for any situation in which human rights are violated and abused. Only an end to the occupation can bring about lasting peace and establish the conditions in which the human rights of all can be fully respected. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Bachelet, for this important briefing and for sharing with us the work of your office is doing to protect the human rights of the Palestinians. I now open the floor for questions and comments on the presentation that we just heard. I give the floor to Ambassador Feridun Sinirlioglus, the PR of Turkey. Ambassador, you have the floor. Is the Ambassador of Turkey with us? Okay.
Ambassador Sinirlol is having a technical problem.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I give the floor to Ambassador of Pedro of Cuba.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to all colleagues. Good morning to the High Commissioner, Madame Bachelet. It's always a pleasure to see you and to have this opportunity to exchange with you. You are most welcome, and surely this exchange is very timely. I just want to ask you two questions. The first one is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted on the human rights of the Palestinian population, particularly the population in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? And the second question is, we have heard you referring extensively to the issue of the recent decision adopted by the Israeli authorities targeting or designating 6 Palestinian NGOs as terrorist organizations. My question is, what would be the impact of such a decision on the work that your office carry on in the Palestinian territory, and if there is any sign, after all the complaints raised by the international community with the Israeli authorities on this unjustified decision, if there is any sign by them to review the decision, and if not, what would be then the options at hand by the international community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro, for that. Now I give the floor to Ambassador Riyad Mansour of Palestine.
Thank you very much, Muhammad, and I want to thank the committee and the division for organizing this important encounter with High Commissioner Madame Bachelet for being with us this morning, and I want to thank her for her extensive briefing and for her principled position in defending human rights of the Palestinian people, the occupied Palestinian territory, including Jerusalem and everywhere else. I known Madame Bachelet for a long time. I had the honor of meeting her in her presidential office, San Diego, Chile, and I met with her several times in Geneva. I know where her heart is and her mind. She is genuinely and in a principled way committed to the defense of human rights of all people, in this case, Palestinian people in the occupied territory. We remember, among many other things, courage in which she announced a database from the beginning of her tenure as a High Commissioner. And that database is extremely important and in line with the operative paragraph 5 of Resolution of the Security Council that calls for the differentiation in dealing with Israel in the borders of the State of Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. And that contribution of exposing those who are involved in illegal activities, particularly in the settlement enterprise, is in line in defending international law, international humanitarian law, and exposing the illegal settlement enterprise. And in this connection, we trust that Madame Bachelet will update this database to continue informing the international community about those who are committing this violation and exposing them and pressuring them to stop continuation of this activity. Also, we are encouraged to see the International Commission on the inquiry of all violations of discriminations and human rights violations of the Palestinian people in the occupied territory and elsewhere. And we hope that the Commission will begin its work and will publish the result of its work as quickly as possible as a contribution in the defense of the rights of the Palestinians. Also, I want to thank you, Madame Bachelet, for many things, including your principal position vis-a-vis the 6 civil society organizations that were characterized by the Israeli occupying authorities the way they were characterized. We reject that, and we defend these organizations, and we defend all civil society organizations of the Palestinian people in the occupied territory. Welcome again. We will continue working with you. I wish that we were able to meet with you in person in New York, but hopefully we will meet in person, whether in New York or in Geneva or somewhere else. I'll stop here. And also I want to thank my brother Muhammad for chairing, this encounter on behalf of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Mansour. Now we have the ambassador of Turkey. Feridun, now you have the floor.
Thank you, Mohammed. I would like to thank you for organizing this meeting and Madam High Commissioner for her insightful and comprehensive briefing. Israel's policies of occupation, annexation, and blockade against Palestine continue unabated. It's clear that these policies do not contribute to the efforts aimed at achieving peace and stability in the Middle East. I reiterate Turkey's support for judicial processes to hold Israel accountable for its crimes in the occupied territories. UN Human Rights Council and International Criminal Court processes are important to put an end to the impunity with which Israel is continuing to perpetrate these serious crimes. We welcome the establishment of an independent international commission of inquiry to investigate the violations committed in the occupied Palestinian territory. We are ready to provide every assistance and support to the work of the Commission. The status of Jerusalem is a fundamental issue that remains at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Efforts to change or erode the historical, legal, and demographic status of Jerusalem constitute a serious crime. All members of the international community should respect the international parameters on the historical and legal status of Jerusalem. The humanitarian conditions, especially in Gaza, are unsustainable and unacceptable. It's important to provide unhindered access to Gaza. Israel's attempts to prevent legitimate civil society activity in the occupied territories has become an additional source of concern recently. Classifying 6 Palestinian human rights organizations as terrorist organizations is contrary to human rights and international law. The establishment of an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine on the basis of the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital is the only viable solution to the conflict. The international community cannot turn its back on the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people for freedom and dignity any longer. Returning to the path of peace negotiation and accelerating all efforts to revitalize the peace process is an urgent necessity. The Quartet must be revitalized and lead the efforts towards a new peace process. Turkey will continue to stand by the Palestinian people for the realization of these goals and the protection of their rights and freedoms. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Feridun. Now we have Ambassador of Venezuela asking for the floor. Joaquin, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also to the Madam High Commissioner for your much valuable briefing and updates. At the outset, allow us to renew our unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people in their struggle for realizing their inalienable right to self-determination in their free, independent, and sovereign state of Palestine. We deeply appreciate this opportunity to engage in an interactive dialogue with the High Commissioner and the frankness of her remarks about the gravity of the situation on the ground. In this context, we would like to ask Madame Bachelet, what is the view from her office on the way forward? How can we effectively assist both the international community and the UN, the Palestinian people, in order to ensure that we move from a business as usual to an action-oriented approach? And how can we redress this human rights crisis, which has been deepened and exacerbated by the COVID-19, the latest military escalation of earlier this year in May, and also by the unilateral designation of 6 Palestinian civil society organizations as terrorists? I thank you, dear Kova.
Thank you, Joaquin. I see no more requests for the floor. Now I give the floor to Ms. Bachelet to address these questions. You have the floor, madam.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the comments and questions. On the situation linked to COVID, since the 8th of March in 2020, Israel imposed what is referred as a coronavirus closure on the Gaza Strip, tightening existing restrictions on travel for people from and to Gaza. Based on this, all travel for work-related purposes or study, family visit have been blocked. And as we all know, access to vaccination has been uneven and unequal in 2021. So the perception is there has not been, I would say, an adequate treatment of the situation in Gaza in terms of the access to vaccines and to treatment there. But also, as I said, the blockages and closures have restricted even more the possibilities of mobility and movement of the people living in Gaza. On the decision on the 6 Palestine NGOs, well, we know, of course, that this is a further erosion of civic and humanitarian space and constrains the work of the 6 organization. They have worked, as I said before, with the international community. We know them very well. They have been very serious and very good partners for decades, and they have been providing essential services to countless Palestinians, women, children, different people in prison, etc. And I think it's also an attack on human rights defenders, on freedom of association, opinion and expression, and on the right to public participations. And this is linked to Israel's continuous policy of restricting the space for legitimate activity of the civil society, violates their obligations under international human rights law, and also risk further limiting the space for peaceful dialogue. We also have seen with really concern unlawful use of force to suppress peaceful protests, violating the rights of freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and shrinking a space available for expression of opposition, including to the military occupation and its policies. And under international law, states have the obligation to ensure the right of peaceful assembly. They must therefore create an enabling environment for peaceful protests, aside from violating the rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Such measures progressively erode space available for non-violent expression of opposition to the occupation. Usually what they used to do was prisoner support. They also were giving legal assistance to Palestinian prisoners in Israel, and also working on humanitarian issues, both in Israel and in OPT, and also, I would say, psychosocial support for children. So if they have been considered illegal, there will be a restriction on the possibility to work on the rights of all of these people, and they will not have adequate support. So it's very important to bring this issue. On the question of the ambassador of Palestine on the database, as you know, there is this resolution that requested the High Commissioner to produce, that was the resolution 31/36 in 2016, requested the High Commission to produce a database of all business enterprises engaged in certain Israeli settlement activity in the OPT, in consultation with the working group on the issue of human rights and transnational corporations and other business enterprises. A first interim report was submitted to the Human Rights Council in March 2018, detailing progress to date to the resolution. A second mandated report containing the list of companies was submitted to the Human Rights Council on the 12th of February 2020. The report contained a list of 112 companies included in the database, and noted that with reference to any updating of the database, our office was recommending that the Human Rights Council establish a group of independent experts with a time-bound mandate to report directly to the Council for such a purpose. But of course, that was not something that the Human Rights Council took into consideration. And as I indicated in my speech at the Human Rights Council for its 6th session, it was not possible for my office to absorb on an open-ended recurring basis into the future the substantial resources that updating the database and reporting to the Council would annually imply, and that any further work of the database could only be discharged consistent with the organization's budgetary process applicable to funding mandates of the Council. So I understand that there is a resolution that calls on the updating of the database, but we have had problem with the budget. So we need to look at how we solve this issue so we can continue, I would say, developing our mandate of updating constantly the database. On the questions of the way forward, well, we all know that what is needed is a political solution. And in that sense, we need that the dialogue between the parties will continue and that we could really ensure a peaceful and political solution for both parties. What can we do? Well, to be honest, I don't know if the member state knows our situation. On one hand, we'll continue monitoring and reporting. We'll continue to prepare all the reports that are mandated, 10 reports that we and the Secretary General has to present every year. This year, we presented one additional one, the one on water resources. But, and the COI has already started working. I have had 2 meetings with them already, first virtual, and they were here like a couple of weeks ago for 2 weeks in Geneva, interviewing many different people to identify. It started with a small start group because we also need the approval by the fifth committee of the PBI, the program budget implication of that resolution, to be able to recruit the whole team. We have a small team, startup team working with the experts, but we have to recruit the whole team. So it would be very good if members that could support us in that petition that will ask for the fifth committee. But on the other hand, I have to tell you that we have had problems. We don't have any international staff in OPT right now because Israel did not extend the visas for all of our colleagues. 16 colleagues, international staff, are now working outside of Palestine. And we have asked our friends to help us in getting the visas renewed. They have not said no, but they have not renewed the visas. So now we have only a small team of national staff, not so small, but national staff there, trying to do their best, and with our colleagues from outside Palestine to do our best. So we would like for help to help us to get the visa so our international staff can go back there. I mean, any democracy can understand the importance of human rights and should provide with the visas to the Human Rights Office so we can really do our job. I understand that we need to do business in a more, not as usual, I agree on that. But I believe that the solution is not a solution that our office can bring. I think it's a political solution. And that needs to be discussed and to find how we can ensure that so many resolutions from the Security Council and from the Human Rights Council are not only resolutions, but also become a reality. So we can ensure that human rights of all Palestinians can be protected and promoted and respected. But as I said in my final part of my words, I do believe that only an end to an occupation can bring about lasting peace and establish the conditions so which human rights can be fully respected.
Thank you. Is there any more requests for the floor? I see none. Oh, Feda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Bachelet. I'm the deputy of the state of Palestine. And just to follow up on what Minister Mansour has said, again, to thank you for your very principled stance on the Palestine question and in regards to the human rights of the Palestinian people. Understanding the need for a political solution that brings an end to the occupation, but in the circumstances where Israel is opposed to ending the occupation and actually entrenching the occupation, and in a situation where it rejects dialogue and rejects engagement in a peace process and rejects the international consensus on a just solution, the two-state solution. I just want to ask again, in terms of what measures of accountability can be pursued by states, by governments, in particular in regards to human rights. Because I think that we're at a juncture where it seems clear that something has to be done by the international community to create the kind of pressure that will lead to this occupation becoming so costly that it produces the conditions needed for credible dialogue in a credible political process. Thank you, Madam Bachelet.
Any more requests? If not, I give the floor to Madam Bachelet.
Oh, I mean, we have lots of reports that relate to different aspects that have been mandated by the Human Rights Council or by the General Assembly to ourselves or to the Secretary General that can help and providing evidence and information that can lead to have enough information for the moment that some other mechanism can work. And I think a very important mechanism is the one on the Commission of Inquiry. First of all, because that's the kind of commissions who can bring accountability, who can collect information, enough information that can, if I would say, be an important tool for accountability. It is an ongoing commission, so it won't have the problem that, I mean, it's not that every year it will be discussed in every Human Rights Council if there will be approval to continue or not. So this is a commission that will be working for many years. And that's why we have asked for an important budget to ensure and sustain the work. And the Commission of Inquiry also is mandated to analyze the root causes of the conflict and what can be the recommendations on that, but also it covers Israel. It doesn't cover only OPT. So I think that the Commission of Inquiry can be, as it has been in other parts of the world, a very important step in terms of holding perpetrators accountable.
Ms. Bachelet, we are very grateful to you for taking the time to participate in this meeting, sharing important information and answering our questions. I call on all members and observers of the committee, friends of the Palestinian people and defenders of human rights to take action collectively and in your national capacity. Now is the time to act in a coordinated and decisive manner and demonstrate our unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people. Before I conclude, I would like to thank all members and observers of the committee for participating in this special committee meeting. I have one item to mention under AOB. May I remind the committee to return the client surveys to the Secretariat if you haven't already done so. The first part of the today's committee meeting is adjourned. Please remain logged in on this same platform as the virtual meeting with the Human Rights NGO will start immediately after a short technical break. Thank you again, Ms. Bachelet. We wish you the best in your endeavor. I now close this meeting of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and I hope the next time is in person in New York. And great to see very good old friends over there.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Bachelet.
Please, can I ask everyone, do not go offline, remain logged in. The next meeting will start in about 10 minutes or so. Yeah, so.
Okay. I will mute myself and stop my video, but I will still log in.
Okay, good, very good.